Chapter 5. Professor Snape asked Cedric to stay behind after the Slytherin prefect meeting one Sunday evening. "Professor?" Cedric asked, once the other prefects had filed out of the professor's office. "Mr. Diggory, have a seat," the man instructed, gesturing for Cedric to take a seat at one of the chairs in front of his desk. One of Cedric's favorite things about Snape was that the man didn't waste time with pleasantries or non-essential niceties. In the staff meeting, several of the professors reported that Harry Potter's class performance has steadily improved over the last few weeks, and Mr. Potter informed his head of house that you have been tutoring him. Is this true? "Yes, Professor," Cedric responded. His eyes narrowing, Snape asked, "Have you been helping him write his essays? Several of the professors, myself included, can find no other reason for the sudden improvement in the quality of his work." Eyebrows raised, Cedric said. "As in you think he's copying assignments from me?" Snape nodded. "Well, I suggest resource material to him, and I proofread his essays if he's confused about any of the subject material, but we usually work on the practical aspects of his classes. His spell work, I mean. I suppose his schooling's been rather distracted by events in his private and personal life over the last few years, and as a result he never grasped some of the basic principles of performing magic in most of his subjects." "Is that so?" Snape slowly drawled. "He's never had any serious issues with his classes before." "Only because he's so powerful," Cedric replied. "Oh?" the man asked, his chin tilting minutely in a way which made the man seem somewhat predatory. Cedric nodded. "There's a whole slew of spells he never learned the proper wand movements for. He would make the spells work by pure force of will. I'm hoping that after he's mastered the basics, I might start working on speechless and wandless magic with him over the summer." Snape blinked at him for a few moments, then heavily leaned back in his chair. "You truly believe Potter would be capable of such magic?" Cedric nodded. "He grew up with muggles who didn't encourage his magic, and didn't encourage him in anything, really, studying included. I suspect that his friend Hermione is the one who taught him how to do research and write essays, but he's had very little one-on-one attention from adults or professors over the years. His true potential has been going to waste." "I see," Snape hummed. "I'll need to speak with the headmaster. He'll certainly want to be made aware of this. But if what you say is true, I'm glad to hear that you've provided Potter with some direction. Merlin knows he could do better than the know-it-all and the dunderhead who follows him around. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mr. Diggory. You're free to go." "Of course, Professor," Cedric said as he stood to leave. Secretly he wished that he could be as dour and short with people as the potions master was. If Cedric wasn't so determined to be considered an upstanding member of the community, he wouldn't have to waste so much time and energy pandering to others. "Let's go for a walk," Cedric suggested, when they were dismissed after the weighing of the wands. "Some fresh air will make you feel better." "Maybe," Harry said, still clearly upset. Setting an arm around Harry's shoulder, Cedric quietly urged, "Come on, talking about it will help." Outside, they set out towards the lake and sat under a tree a little ways from the water's edge. Cedric sat close to Harry so that their shoulders and outstretched legs were pressed together. Harry didn't seem to notice, but Cedric didn't take offense. The younger teen's brow was still furrowed, and it was obvious that whatever Skeeter said to him during their interview had disturbed him. "What happened?" Cedric asked. "She asked a lot of horrible, invasive questions about my parents, and the quill she was using to take notes. From what I saw, it wrote that I had started crying," Harry told him. "I don't think she cared about the tournament at all." Cedric once again put his arm around Harry, and the younger student released a long, aggravated breath before slouching into Cedric's side. "I'll start my own newspaper," Cedric offered, "and I'll interview you about your interview with Rita Skeeter." Harry gave a soft snort of laughter at this, so Cedric continued, telling him, "The paper will be called Champion's Muse, and the article will be titled, Rita Skeeter, Reporter or Repugnant." "I'll get Colin Creevey to stick a camera in her face," Harry chuckled. "He's so short, most of the picture would probably be a view up her nostrils," Cedric agreed. Now Harry was laughing. "Your newspaper sounds more like a mean poster we could put up around the school, like those stupid badges the Slytherins have started passing out, only for Rita Skeeter." "No," Cedric argued. "It would be a proper publication. We could interview Fleur on how she comes across as condescending, even when she's speaking a language that none of the other champions understand. And we could interview Crumb for an instructional piece on how to be menacing and brooding." "I'll interview you on how to be pretty," Harry informed him. "You think I'm pretty?" Cedric asked, eyebrows raised. Of all the ways people had complimented his appearance, no one had ever called him pretty before. "It's something the Weasley twins say," Harry informed him with a teasing grin. "They call you Pretty Boy Diggory." "So you don't think I'm pretty?" Cedric teased. Heat rose to Harry's cheeks, and he began to stutter. I mean, not pretty exactly. Not to say you're unattractive or anything. You're not a troll. That is to say—" "I think you're pretty," Cedric interrupted. What?" Potter gaped. "I'm not pretty. I'm not good looking at all." "Who told you that?" Cedric asked. People make fun of my glasses, and my hair is always a mess, and I hardly have any clothes that fit properly." "You have lovely eyes regardless of your glasses. Your messy hair makes you look like you just jumped off a broom, and your ill-fitting clothes have nothing to do with whether or not you're attractive," Cedric neatly argued. Harry snorted. "I'll never be handsome like you." "So you do think I'm handsome," Cedric confirmed. Again, color rose to Harry's cheeks. Everyone does." "Well, I think you're pretty handsome too," Cedric announced, then leaned over to press a kiss to Harry's cheek, just at the edge of his lips. Oh, he murmured, his eyes wide. "Take my word for it," Cedric pressed. "Okay," Harry quietly agreed, looking at his hands. Chuckling, Cedric set his hands under Harry's chin, tilted his face up, and properly pressed his lips to Harry's. The younger student gave a startled gasp, but then quickly pressed into the kiss before pulling away. "Good," Cedric told him with a pleased grin. By the next day, Cedric had honestly forgotten about Rita Skeeter and the weighing of the wands. He was far more interested in remembering the brief kisses he'd shared with Harry, first by the lake, then in the entrance hall when they parted ways for their next classes, then in the library when they met to study, and once more before they parted ways to return to their respective dorms for the evening. During the next Hogsmeade weekend, Cedric was determined to hold Harry's hand publicly while they strolled through the village. Cedric didn't forget about Rita Skeeter for long, however. It was impossible to do so with all the fuss everyone was making about her article in the Daily Prophet the next morning. In the beginning, when their names first came out of the goblet, Cedric didn't mind that their fellow students were harassing Harry, but Rita Skeeter was an adult. She should know better than to bully a child so publicly and so viciously. When one of his younger housemates showed him the article and asked Cedric what he thought about it, he said plainly, "I think it's a load of sensational trash. Harry's talked to me about his parents and their deaths loads of times, and he's never gotten teary-eyed or weepy. He came to terms with what happened to them long ago, and he's strong enough to accept the things he can't change. It isn't Harry that's looking for attention. It's Rita Skeeter, and she's taking advantage of an underage wizard to get it." As his housemates began to chatter excitedly at this announcement, Cedric idly commented, "If this is the kind of quality reporting the Prophet is going to print, I might just withdraw my subscription with them. The Quibbler has more journalistic integrity than this rag." After lunch that day, Harry caught Cedric on his way to class. "I heard that you spoke for me this morning," Harry told him, fidgeting with the strap of his bag. "And well, thanks." He suddenly lurched forward, stood up on his toes, and pressed his lips to Cedric's chin. Behind the pair, there was hooting and whistling as Cedric's friends came up the stairs and spotted them. Blushing furiously, Harry turned on his heels and ran. Cedric was grinning, though, and he gladly endured the teasing of his year mates as they made their way to class. Cedric was pleased with his and Harry's next outing to Hogsmeade. Harry wore one of the sweaters he bought during their last visit to the village, the one that Cedric said he liked because it was soft and brought out Harry's eyes. They took another stroll around the village, Harry describing sneaking into the village the year before and playing tricks on his classmate Draco Malfoy, and other adventures he'd had while sneaking around the castle. "You and Malfoy seem to get into tussles quite often," Cedric noted, as they started down the main street. He and Harry had been walking hand in hand long enough by now that Harry was no longer nervous as they walked, or awkward when people noticed them together, and it was cool enough outside that the contact remained comfortable. "Haven't you ever met someone you just hated at first glance?" Harry asked. Cedric hummed. Liza Ernstrung. She was a Hufflepuff, 4 years ahead of me." "What was wrong with her?" Harry asked. "Nothing," Cedric replied. "Well then, why didn't you like her?" he pressed. "Was she mean to you?" "No, she was one of the prefects in charge of helping the first years get settled in when I started at Hogwarts. She was always friendly and helpful and offered to assist us with our classes if we had any trouble." "And she didn't cause trouble or take a bunch of points from your house or anything?" Harry asked. "No, she was always well-behaved, fair to students in other houses, and the teachers loved her." "Well then, what was it you didn't like about her?" "I've no idea. I just couldn't stand to be in the same room as her," Cedric replied. "Why don't you like Malfoy, then?" Because he's a pretentious snob, Harry immediately replied. He thinks he's so much better than everyone else just because his father's rich and he's a pureblood, and he looks down on other people when they aren't exactly like him. He acts like he deserves everything in the world, even though he's done nothing to deserve any of it, and he's always been horrible to me and my friends. You didn't fight or get into arguments with Liza Ernstrom? Harry asked. No, I pretended she didn't exist, and she never bothered me, Cedric replied. Harry exhaled sharply. I wish it was that simple with Malfoy. He goes out of his way to get me and my friends in trouble and annoy me every chance he gets. Harry was thinking about those badges, which were spread around the school. Cedric was sure. Don't worry about him, Cedric said after a moment. He's all bark and no bite. He seems to bite hard enough to me, Harry mumbled. Please, Cedric snorted. Malfoy's nothing more than a little coward. It's to be expected, though. His father's a nasty son of a bitch, and even though his mother plays the demure pureblood lady, I hear she has a pretty big personality herself. Between the two of them, they've gotten Draco browbeaten. Most of his bit is posturing, because it's expected of him, and he's terrified to have an original thought of his own. The rest of the students in his year follow along behind him, because their parents are just as scared of the Malfoys as Draco is. Harry blinked. I thought it was because they all want to practice the dark arts. Cedric shook his head. Just because someone's a dark wizard doesn't mean they're evil. Professor Snape's as mean as they come, and performing dark curses comes more easily to him than breathing. He's not evil, though. Same with the Zabinis. Snape and Blaise come from families which have been steeped in the dark arts for longer than Hogwarts has been standing. They're not evil, though. It's simply the magic which runs in their blood, similar to how light magic runs in the Potter and Weasley bloodlines. If any of your lot tried to perform dark magic, you'd eventually drown in it and be consumed. And while Snape and Zabini are able to perform light magic, it's incredibly draining on their magical cores. Do you practice the dark arts? Harry quietly asked. I study it, Cedric replied. I don't practice, though. The Diggory family magic is inherently neutral, but only just. My father and his brother's magic is almost light. You have to be careful practicing dark arts if your magic isn't intrinsically dark, and I figure that performing the dark arts isn't worth the hassle of properly honing my magic or body to perform dark magic without it making me rot. Light and gray magic work well enough for me. Why study it at all, then? Harry asked. Just because I don't practice it doesn't mean I shouldn't understand it, Cedric replied. Half the boys in my dorm dabble with dark magic. It would be careless of me not to keep an eye on what they're doing. Oh, Harry said quietly, chewing at his lip. Shaking Harry's hand, which was still gripped in his, to regain the younger student's attention and distract him from his thoughts, Cedric asked, Want to go for lunch at the Three Broomsticks? If my buddy Jack is there, we can sit with him and you can meet my friends. Okay, Harry hesitantly agreed. Jack and Cedric's friends were not at the Three Broomsticks, but they arrived soon after Cedric and Harry sat down with their butterbeers, and they joined the pair in ordering food. Harry was quiet and shy at first, staying pressed close to Cedric's side and mostly listening to the conversation around him as several older Slytherins joined the table. He perked up a bit more when the topic turned to Quidditch. It's a pity the Durmstrang students don't seem interested in a pickup match, Elliot sighed. It'd be nice to see Crumb fly. I read that Crumb isn't allowed to fly in public pickup matches, Maisie, one of the girls in Cedric's year, declared. It's a violation of his contract with the Bulgarian team. You got to see him at the World Cup, didn't you, Cedric? Cedric nodded. He was brilliant. Definitely one of the best seekers in the world. What do you think, Harry? I was really disappointed that Quidditch was canceled this year. I wanted to try the Wronski feint, he replied. I had a pair of omnioculars for the game, and I must have studied Crumb's flying 100 times over the rest of the summer in order to get an idea of how the maneuver was performed. You were at the game? Jack asked, leaning forward against the table. You must have loved it. Harry shrugged. The match was really fun, but it was ridiculous that those Death Eaters had to go and ruin the celebrations afterwards. Cedric's friends around the table became uneasy, and Harry remembered who exactly he was sitting with a moment too late. I heard that there weren't actually Death Eaters there, Maisie announced. The whole fuss was just a bunch of rowdy drunk people. His expression becoming mulish, Harry shook his head. The Weasley tent was near the entrance to the campground. We were able to hear the men chanting, and they were setting tents on fire and tormenting the Muggle family who owned the grounds. It was horrible. And then someone stole my wand and used it to cast Mors Morday. It was so stupid. The Ministry thought I did it, and then they tried to arrest a house elf for it. Incredulously, Cedric asked, They thought you cast the Dark Lord's spell? Harry nodded with a bitter pout. Whenever things go wrong, people always accuse me of being responsible for it. I didn't even know what Death Eaters or Mors Morte were before the World Cup, but I have this stupid scar on my face, which apparently means I'm some sort of omnipotent being capable of impossible feats of magic, and that I'm intent on causing mayhem. So yeah, they thought I cast the Dark Lord's spell. Idiots, Cedric quietly commiserated, putting his arm over Harry's shoulders and pressing a light kiss to Harry's temple. No kidding, Elliot put in. I guess, Harry muttered. It wouldn't be so bad if they hadn't canceled Quidditch this year. We'll go for a round on the pitch tomorrow, Cedric promised in an attempt to cheer Harry up. He was surprised when the offhand offer caused Harry's mood to instantly brighten. Really? He asked. Sure, Cedric told him, as long as you let me try out that firebolt. Okay, Harry quickly agreed, smiling brightly at Cedric. Cedric couldn't believe it was that easy to make Harry happy. Chapter 6. Cedric was up bright and early to meet Harry out on the pitch. As captain of a house team, even if Quidditch wasn't being played that year, Cedric had a key to the supply shed, and he had just stepped inside to hunt down a snitch when he was shoved further into the shed from behind. Spinning to see who had accosted him, Cedric was surprised to see Harry urgently closing and locking the shed from the inside. Cedric's first thought was to consider how brash Harry was being. Cedric had never been particularly attracted to anyone before, but ever since he started sharing brief kisses and lingering touches with Harry, he found the Gryffindor's face materializing in the fantasies which Cedric had once thought of performing with a hazy, faceless, formless person, which didn't look particularly like anyone at all. In the past, it wasn't the person he got off on thinking of, but the act itself. Lately, though, Cedric found that the person he was imagining those acts with was small and distinctly male, with dark hair, slightly chapped and bitten lips, and wide, bright eyes. The prospect of wanking off with Harry in the Quidditch supply shed was particularly enticing, Cedric found. He liked the idea of having an eager, adventurous boyfriend. These thoughts had barely flickered to life before Cedric instantly banished them. Harry was far too naive and unsure of himself to be so forward. He still blushed every time Cedric smiled at him for a particularly long moment, and he accepted every one of Cedric's kisses as if he couldn't believe his great luck in receiving them. Cedric's understanding of the situation was proven correct when Harry turned to face him, biting his lip and nervously bunching the hem of his sweater in his hands, the Gryffindor clearly distressed. What's happened? Cedric immediately asked. Are you hurt? Have one of the Slytherins done something? Cedric decided that he would kill Draco Malfoy if that little twat had done anything more offensive than wear one of those ridiculous badges. The first task! Harry rushed to say. It's dragons! After we returned from Hogsmeade, I received a message from Hagrid to meet him at midnight near the forest. I saw them, Cedric! There's a dragon for each of us! If it had been anyone but Harry, his skin pale, dark circles under his eyes, and his teeth ruthlessly gnawing on his bottom lip, Cedric would assume that the person who told him he would have to face a dragon was having him on. We're not expected to kill them, are we? Cedric asked incredulously. Dragons are protected by law on every continent and in almost every country, and even if they go mad or rabid and have to be put down, it takes a team of highly skilled wizards. They couldn't possibly expect any of us to do any real harm to one. Cedric quietly cursed. Our Seeker's game is going to need to wait. I need to figure out some sort of plan. I can't believe they're going to just put us in front of dragons without any sort of warning. It's okay, Harry told him, stepping forward and wrapping his arms around Cedric in a tight hug. You're brilliant. You'll come up with a plan without a problem. Hermione's trying to help me plan something, but... Meet me tomorrow, Cedric demanded, pressing his face into Harry's hair. I'll let you know if I come up with anything, and you do the same. Harry hugged him a little more tightly for a brief moment, nodding against his chest, and then stepped away from the embrace. With a shaky breath, Harry said, We should get to it. Cedric came up with his plan as he was walking to dinner on Sunday night. He hadn't found anything in the library which was helpful. Most of the books on dragons were potions manuals or care of magical creatures texts, which detailed the spells and methods in which dragon handlers controlled the beasts. As Cedric suspected, there were footnotes all over the text stating that none of the spells which were used were effective if cast by a single witch or wizard, only by an entire team. Frustrated, he abandoned his research in order to attend dinner. As he was making his way towards the Great Hall, he passed the area where the Gobstone kids gathered to play their games. Cedric much preferred chess. Chess took time, patience, and intelligence. Gobstones was much simpler. For how complicated the moving pieces were and how long the games could last, there were only two real strategies to play, either attack or evade. Cedric was able to determine his player's intentions within the first 3 moves and react accordingly. There was more finesse to chess, though. There were a dozen different strategies one could play with, and the strategy could change at any point during the game. Cedric was especially fond of using the technique which relied on distraction. Cedric came to an abrupt stop in the middle of the hall, and his strategy for going up against the dragon began to take shape. Harry wasn't at dinner on Sunday, or at breakfast the next morning. He caught up with Cedric as he was walking to Charms, however.
"Go on ahead,"
Cedric ordered his friends, when he saw Harry hurrying towards him down the hall. Nodding, his housemates hurried on to their lesson.
"Anything?" he asked Harry.
Harry shook his head. "You?" Cedric nodded.
"I'm going to use Transfiguration,"
he declared. Harry looked dubious. Transfiguration? All the books Hermione and I have gone through say the dragons are extremely resistant to magic. I don't think transfiguring it would work.
Cedric chuckled. "Not the dragon, Harry. I'm going to transfigure some part of my surroundings into an animal of some sort. A big, loud, fast one that will draw the dragon's attention away from me."
"Oh," Harry said, blinking. With a slow smile, he said, "That's brilliant, Cedric. I knew you'd come up with something. I never would have thought. Too bad I can't do anything like that. I don't know any magic as complicated as object-to-animal transfiguration."
"You'll begin to study at your 5th year," Cedric told him quietly. "Keep thinking. I'll be in the library practicing tonight. If you still haven't come up with anything, I'll try to think of—"
"Potter! Diggory!" Both teenagers jumped at Professor Moody's loud cry. "Shouldn't you be getting to class, Diggory?" the professor asked, his magical eyes swiveling from Cedric to the classroom which he was supposed to be in, attending a lecture which had doubtlessly already started.
"Yes, sir," Cedric said, as he slowly turned to continue down the hall.
Behind him, he heard Moody snarl, "Potter, come with me!" As Cedric made his way into class, he wondered what Moody was doing in the Charms corridor, 3 floors above his own classroom and on the opposite side of the school from the headmaster's office or the teacher's lounge. It was just after dinner, and Cedric was in the room he met with Harry to study in, practicing his transfiguration. "Cedric!" Harry said with a gasp when he came into the room. "That's amazing!" Cedric shook his head, scowling at the German Shepherd sitting in the middle of the room, wagging its tail as it watched Harry come into the room.
"I can't get the coloring right," he declared, as he ran a frustrated hand through his hair. "McGonagall's only taught us small object-to-animal transfiguration so far, and anything I try to do larger than a cat comes out too dark."
"Why can't it be dark?" Hermione Granger asked, as she followed Harry into the room.
"Dragons are colorblind, and their eyesight is augmented by heat sensory vision," he informed her. "I'm going into that arena tomorrow wearing a bright green and silver uniform, and I'll seem like a fairy light against the terrain. Dark-colored animals blend in too well with the landscape, but a dog's body temperature is higher than a human's. A breed that's big, with light coloring, will do the most to draw attention away from me, and I'm afraid I can't do any transfiguration bigger than a dog."
"Oh, I hadn't thought of that," the girl murmured. "Have you thought of charming the dog's fur bright after you transfigure it?"
"Yes," Cedric sighed. "I shouldn't have to, though. I should be able to transfigure the exact animal I need on the first attempt."
Finally turning away from his frustrating task, Cedric held out an arm to Harry and was satisfied when the Gryffindor quickly and neatly fit himself against Cedric's side for a quick hug.
"What about you?" Cedric quietly asked. "Any ideas?"
Harry nodded. "I talked to Moody this morning, and he suggested I play to my talents."
"Oh?"
Cedric curiously pressed. Harry nodded. If I can summon my broom from Gryffindor Tower, I think I might have a chance. I haven't found a single spell which might work against a dragon, but we're studying summoning spells and charms." Cedric slowly blinked. He was powerful enough when it came to spellcasting, but his true talent lay in the detail of the magic. Where most of his classmates relied upon spells which required quick bursts of energy, Cedric was skilled in performing highly intricate spells and charms, which required a fraction of the magical effort some spells needed, but much more focus and concentration. As Harry explained his plan, he and Hermione were going to practice a simple summoning charm, Accio, until he could summon a large object from a great distance. Cedric could hardly believe what he was hearing. Cedric knew there was hardly anyone in the world who possessed the pure, raw energy which would be required to send a spell across such a great distance, successfully find its intended target, and then pull the energy and the item both back. Harry talked like it would be the simplest thing in the world with a bit of practice, and his friend was earnestly nodding along, as if there was not a single doubt in her mind that Harry would be capable of such a feat.
"Muggleborn," Cedric realized. "She honestly doesn't know better."
It was a good plan, though. Far better than any Cedric had thought up for Harry. The Gryffindor was brilliant at flying, and if there was anything Cedric had learned in his time tutoring the younger teen, it was that if anyone could perform magic of the magnitude it would require to summon a broom from such a great distance, it would be Harry.
"It's not that you're doing the spell wrong,"
Cedric told Harry, after watching him attempt to cast the magic a few times.
You're simply not concentrating hard enough. Come on, Harry. We've talked about this. Don't let anything else distract you. Focus on your target, make yourself want it, and then take it.
Half the trick to performing magic is intent, Harry dutifully recited.
That's right, Cedric told him. You've done this a dozen times, Harry. Focus, want, and take. Try again.
Harry's next attempt was markedly better. Cedric rewarded him by hugging him from behind and pressing a quick kiss to his neck.
Good, he told Harry. Keep practicing. I'm going to return to my transfiguration.
Harry nodded, gracing Cedric with another grateful smile, and then they returned to their practice.